Hello and welcome to our story reading this week. We are reading The Adventures of Chatterer the Red Squirrel. And last time when we left him, Farmer Brown's boy had put him in a special box. And that's where we find Chatterer this week. Chapter 14, Chatterer decides to live. At first, Chatterer decided that he had rather die than live in a prison, no matter how nice that prison might be. It was a very foolish thing to do, but he made up his mind that he just wouldn't eat. He wouldn't touch that nice yellow corn Farmer Brown's boy had put in his prison for him. He would starve himself to death. Yes, sir, he would starve himself to death. So when he found that there was no way to get out of the prison, he curled up in the little hollow stump in his prison, where no one could see him, and made up his mind that he would stay there until he died. Life wasn't worth living if he had to stop spending all the rest of his days in a prison. He wouldn't even make himself comfortable. There was that little heap of nice shavings and bits of rag for him to make a nice comfortable bed of, but he didn't touch them. No, sir. He just tried to make himself miserable. Not once that long day did he poke so much as the tip of his nose out of his little round doorway. Ever so many times Farmer Brown's boy came to see him and whistled and called softly to him, but Chatterer didn't make a sound. At last night came, and the woodshed where his prison was grew dark and darker and very still. Now, it was about this time that Chatterer's stomach began to make itself felt. Chatterer tried not to notice it, but his stomach would be noticed. And Chatterer couldn't help himself. His stomach was empty, and it kept telling him so. "I'm going to starve to death," said Chatterer to himself over and over. "I'm empty, and there's plenty of food to fill me up, if you'll only stop being silly," whispered his stomach. The more Chatterer tried not to think of how good something to eat would taste, the more he did think of it. It made him restless and uneasy. He twisted and squirmed and turned. At last he decided that he would have one more look to see if he couldn't find some way to get out of his prison. He poked his head out of the little round doorway. All was still and dark. He listened, but not a sound could he hear. Then he softly crept out and hurriedly examined all the inside of his prison. It was of no use. There wasn't a single place where he could use his sharp teeth. "There's that little pile of corn waiting for me," whispered his stomach. "I'll never touch it," said Chatterer fiercely. Just then he hit something with his foot, and it rolled. He picked it up and put it down again. It was a nut, a plump hickory nut. 2 or 3 times he picked it up and put it down, and each time it was harder than before to put it down. I'd like to taste one more nut before I starve to death," muttered Chatterer. And almost without knowing it, he began to gnaw the hard shell. When that nut was finished, he found another, and when that was gone, still another. Then he just had to taste a grain of corn. The first thing Chatterer knew, the nuts and the corn were all gone, and his stomach was full. Somehow he felt ever so much better. He didn't feel like starving to death now. I believe I'll wait a bit and see what happens," he said to himself. "And while I'm waiting, I may as well be comfortable." With that, he began to carry the shavings and rags into the hollow stump, and soon had as comfortable a bed as ever he had slept on. Chatterer had decided to live. Chapter 15. Farmer Brown's boy tries to make friends. Nobody lives who's wholly bad. Some good you'll find in every heart. Your enemies will be your friends, if only you will do your part. All his life, Chatterer the Red Squirrel had looked on Farmer Brown's boy as his enemy, just as did all the other little people of the Green Meadows, the Green Forest, and the Smiling Pool. They feared him, and because they feared him, they hated him. So whenever he came near, they ran away. Now at first, Farmer Brown's boy used to run after them for just one thing, because he wanted to make friends with them, and he couldn't see how ever he was going to do it, unless he caught them. After a while, when he found that he couldn't catch them by running after them, he made up his mind that they didn't want to be friends. And so then he began to hunt them, because he thought it was fun to try to outwit them. Of course, when he began to do that, they hated and feared him all the more. You see, they didn't understand that really he had one of the kindest hearts in the world. And he didn't understand that they hated him just because they didn't know him. So when Chatterer had been caught in the trap in Farmer Brown's corn crib, he hadn't doubted in the least that Farmer Brown's boy would give him to Black Pussy, or do something equally cruel. And even when he found that he was only to be kept a prisoner in a very comfortable prison, with plenty to eat and drink, he wasn't willing to believe any good of Farmer Brown's boy. Indeed, he hated him more than ever, if that were possible. But Farmer Brown's boy was very patient. He came to Chatterer's prison ever so many times a day and whistled and clucked and talked to Chatterer. And he brought good things to eat. It seemed as if he were all the time trying to think of some new treat for Chatterer. He never came without bringing something. At first, Chatterer would hide in his hollow stump as soon as he saw Farmer Brown's boy coming, and wouldn't so much as peek out until he had gone away. When he was sure that the way was clear, he would come out, and always he found some delicious fat nuts or some other dainties waiting for him. After a little, as soon as he saw Farmer Brown's boy coming, Chatterer would begin to wonder what good thing he had brought this time, and would grow terribly impatient for Farmer Brown's boy to go away so that he could find out. By and by, it got so that he couldn't wait, and would slyly peep out of his little round doorway to see what had been brought for him. Then, one day, Farmer Brown's boy didn't come at all. Chatterer tried to make himself believe that he was glad. He told himself that he hated Farmer Brown's boy, and he hoped that he never would see him again. But all the time he knew that wasn't true. It was the longest day since Chatterer had been a prisoner. Early the next morning, before Chatterer was out of bed, he heard a step in the woodshed. And before he thought what he was doing, he was out of his hollow stump to see if it really was Farmer Brown's boy. It was, and he had 3 great fat nuts which he dropped into Chatterer's cage. It seemed to Chatterer that he just couldn't wait for Farmer Brown's boy to go away. Finally, he darted forward and seized one. Then he scampered to the shelter of his hollow stump to eat it. When it was finished, he just had to have another. Farmer Brown's boy was still watching, but somehow Chatterer didn't feel so much afraid. This time he sat up on one of his little branches of the stump and ate it in plain sight. Farmer Brown's boy smiled, and it was a pleasant smile. "I believe we shall be friends after all," he said. Chapter 16. Chatterer has a pleasant surprise. Chatterer the Red Squirrel, the mischief maker of the Green Forest, had never been more comfortable in his life. No matter how rough Brother North Wind roared across the Green Meadows and through the Green Forest, piling the snow in great drifts, he couldn't send so much as one tiny shiver through the little red coat of Chatterer. And always right at hand was plenty to eat, corn and nuts and other good things such as Chatterer loves. No, he never had been so comfortable in all his life. But he wasn't happy. Not truly happy. You see, he was in a prison, and no matter how nice a prison may be, no one can truly be happy there. Since he had been a prisoner, Chatterer had learned to think very differently of Farmer Brown's boy from what he used to think. In fact, he and Farmer Brown's boy had become very good friends. For Farmer Brown's boy was always very gentle and always brought him something good to eat. "He isn't at all like I had thought," said Chatterer, "and if I were free, I wouldn't be afraid of him at all. I'd like to tell some of the other little Green Forest people about him." If only— Chatterer didn't finish. Instead, a great lump filled his throat. You see, he was thinking of the Green Forest and the old orchard and how he used to race through the treetops and along the stone wall. Half the fun in his life had been in running and jumping, and now there wasn't room in this little prison to stretch his legs. If only he could run as hard as ever he knew how, once in a while. He felt that his prison couldn't be quite so hard to put up with. That very afternoon, while Chatterer was taking a nap in his bed in the hollow stump, something was slipped over his little round doorway, and Chatterer awoke in a terrible fright to find himself a prisoner inside his hollow stump. There was nothing he could do about it, but just lie there in his bed and shake with fright, and wonder what dreadful thing was going to happen next. He could hear Farmer Brown's boy very busy about something in his cage. After a long, long time, his little round doorway let in the light once more. The door had been opened. At first, Chatterer didn't dare go out, but he heard the soft little whistle with which Farmer Brown's boy always called him when he had something especially nice for him to eat. So at last he peeped out. There, on the floor of the cage, were some of the nicest nuts. Chatterer came out at once, when his sharp eyes discovered something else. It was a funny-looking thing made of wire at one end of his cage. Chatterer looked at it with great suspicion. Could it be a new kind of trap? But what would a trap be doing there, when he was already a prisoner? He ate all the nuts, all the time watching this new funny-looking thing. It seemed harmless enough. He went a little nearer. Finally, he hopped onto it. It moved. Of course, that frightened him, and he started to run up, but he couldn't go up. No, sir, he didn't go up. You see, he was in a wire wheel, and as he ran, the wheel went around. Chatterer was terribly frightened, and the faster he tried to run, the faster the wheel went around. Finally, he had to stop, because he was out of breath, and too tired to run another step. When he stopped, the wheel stopped. Little by little, Chatterer began to understand. Farmer Brown's boy had made that wheel to give him a chance to run all he wanted to, and whenever he wanted to. When he understood this, Chatterer was as nearly happy as he could be in a prison. It was such a pleasant surprise. He would race and race in it until he just had to stop for breath. Farmer Brown's boy looked on and laughed to see how much happier he had made Chatterer. That was a nice surprise for Chatterer. We're going to stop there today. You'll have to come back next week to find out what happens to Chatterer. Bye, guys.